Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at the US model of 1905 Bayonet. Now there's two productions of this bayonet. There was the first production, which was just before, during and after the First World War, and there was another production during the Second World War. These were made to fit the model 1903 Springfield rifle. Now the model 1903 originally came with a ramrod bayonet, which was essentially a very long spike. These were used from 1903 till 1905 when they were replaced by this bayonet here. Now the story goes that President Teddy Roosevelt, who was a bit of an outdoorsman, ex-soldier, very rough and tumble kind of guy, saw a soldier with a model 1903 bayonet with a ramrod bayonet, and he challenged that soldier to a duel. He armed himself with a Krag rifle with a Krag bayonet, and with one stroke he bent the ramrod bayonet on the Springfield rifle. And he's quoted to have said something along the lines of, "This is no good, we need to replace it with a real bayonet." So that's exactly what they did. They replaced the ramrod bayonet with essentially what we have here, which is pretty much a Krag bayonet. So the Krag was a bit shorter, I can't remember the exact length, I haven't actually examined one yet myself. But it was just a copy of the model of 1889 Swiss bayonet, which I have done a video on. The Krag was introduced in 1892, and essentially what we have here, just much shorter. The handle, crossguard and pommel were all pretty much, or were the same. Largely the same, there was one minor difference. So it's quite a good bayonet. Now, because the Springfield rifle was considerably shorter than the Krag rifle, it was deemed that US soldiers would be at a disadvantage when bayonet fencing with other soldiers. So, to compensate for that, they opted for a longer bayonet to make up for that disadvantage. A lot like the British with their model of pattern of 1907 bayonet. They went from the pattern 1903, which was reasonably short, to the pattern 1907, when they adopted a shorter rifle. Now, initially, these bayonets were produced in the white. However, during the First World War, on recommendation from the British, I believe it was, and French, they were parkerized and blued. And the reason for that was to reduce glare from the moonlight, make soldiers harder to see. These bayonets will also fit on the M1 Garand, and in the Second World War, many of these were converted to M1 bayonets by shortening them back down. Now, the first production of these bayonets was carried out by two companies in the US. So first off, there was the Rock Island Arsenal, and they produced 430,000 of these between 1906 and 1922. Second, we had Springfield Armory, which is what this one here is, and they produced many more. They produced 1.196 million between 1907 and 1919, for a combined total of 1.626 million. That's a lot of bayonets. However, it should be noted that's significantly less than the number of Model 1917 bayonets that were produced for the Enfield rifle, which was used by the US in World War I. That was actually the primary rifle used by the US during World War I, or at least many more of them were fielded than the Springfields. Now, when the US were looking at adopting this bayonet, they wanted to improve upon the Krag, and the Krag really only had two complaints. First off, it had a metal scabbard, the complaint being that that used to rust and dent. And the second complaint was that it used to fall out of the scabbard as well. So the way they addressed these is, first off, they added a locking mechanism just here. And it's a bit difficult to see, but there's a little catch inside the crossguard, and if you see the scabbard here, we have little hooks either side. Those hooks engage with this catch and it locks the bayonet into the scabbard. I'll demonstrate that. And as you see, it's locked in place. To remove it, I need to press the button and pull it out. And while this was initially seen as a way of fixing the problem, it later became a detraction for not necessarily this bayonet, but the M1 bayonet, which this became later. I've discussed that in one of my later videos. Essentially, when wearing mittens in Korea, soldiers found it very difficult to engage that button and release it. Now, to address the second problem, the scabbards, they introduced a leather scabbard. They had quite a few issues with the early scabbards. So the early leather ones still had the same wire hanger as the Krag. And when it was moved around, that was found to be a weak point and the wire hanger would snap off. So to address this, they tried initially using leather loops, which were a little small and flimsy and broke as well. Then they tried using wire hangers, similar to what we have here. Then in 1910, they replaced those scabbards with a wooden scabbard wrapped in canvas, and that's known as the Model 1910 scabbard. I don't have one of these. The only one I've got here today is a US Navy Mark 1 scabbard, and these are actually for training bayonets used by the Navy in World War II. However, because a lot of the early scabbards, like the leather and the wood ones and canvas, broke, it's very common to find the training bayonet scabbards paired with the early Model 1905s. Now, taking a look at the construction, we've got a very nice long blade with a square fuller finishing in a spear point. We've got a slight false edge and a true edge running down the length of the blade. It's not sharp and it's a bit of a dull point, but I imagine they would have sharpened up quite nicely. This one's got a couple of dings in the blade, someone's been sword fighting with it. Got a nice, thick, solid spine and a very generous ricasso. Now, the crossguard is pretty much identical to the Swiss one, except we have these two cuts either side. We have nice muzzle ring and wooden grips. So the way you can really tell the difference between the World War I and World War II production of these bayonets, the first production will always have the wooden grips. The second production generally have plastic or Bakelite grips. Now, the grips are retained by only a single screw and sort of the odd shape which fits into the pommel down the bottom. Taking a look at the pommel, we've got like a eagle head style pommel here with a T Mortise, if I can get that on camera. And interestingly enough, our catch just here above my thumb is also engaged by this button here. So when I depress that button, the catch lowers. So we have an internal mechanism within the handle, and to get to that, I've got to undo the screw. I'll take it apart for you now. So whenever you pull apart a bayonet, make sure you get screwdrivers that actually fit correctly. Don't use an improper fit. So I'm using a gunsmithing set here, and I've got a piece that fits very nicely. Now, I've taken the grip panels and the screw out off camera because they were quite firm and it took a bit of jiggling to really get them out. They were a very tight fit. But here you can see the internal mechanism, how the bayonet actually works. So this lever is our locking lug back here and it's connected to the button. So when you press your button, as you can see, it just pivots around the screw which goes through the grip panels here. Now, to disassemble this, you depress the button and the lever just pops straight out, and then the button just comes out the bottom. I did see one of these recently that had been assembled with the button in backwards, and that wouldn't allow the bayonet to lock into the scabbard. But to reassemble it, the button just goes straight back in there, depress the button, and lever goes in. Works just fine. And then obviously grip panels go back on. Now, as I previously stated, the scabbard I do have here is for the Mark 1 training bayonet, the US Navy one, and it's just a very long fiberglass green body with a wire hanger at the top and a locket with our locking mechanism or our locking hooks. Very similar to the M1 bayonet, and you might recognise the construction from the M8A1 scabbards on the M7 bayonet, which is very, very common today. Now finally, I'll jump into the markings on this bayonet. So on one side down here at the top, you're going to have your manufacturer, and it's just going to be an abbreviation. So SA for Springfield Armory, RIA for Rock Island Arsenal. underneath that, it's hard to get on camera here, we've got our US Ordnance Bomb, and below that our date of manufacture. Here we've got 1918. I have read at one point they did stop the date of manufacture. I'm not certain if that was the first production during World War I or if that was after World War I or even the second production during World War II. On the other side we just have a property stamp for US, and then beneath that we have a serial number. And that's really all the markings you'll find on this bayonet. Some of these were exported during the Second World War, and you'll find other markings. For example, New Zealand received a few, and I believe their Air Force, I think it was, operated a number of 1903 Springfield rifles with these bayonets, and you'll find New Zealand markings in the grip. So you'll find either an NZ broad arrow D for Department of Defence, or an N broad arrow Z, and possibly a serial number in the grip as well. Those are really the only markings you'll find on the bayonet. Now the actual scabbards, as I said, the Mark 1 here we have US Navy and Mark 1. That's all you'll find in these scabbards, but the original ones did have markings on them as well, so you'll find stampings on the leather. The only example I've found has a RIA 1907 and JNS, RIA being the manufacturer, 1907 the year of manufacture, and JNS the inspector from Rock Island Arsenal. We don't know who that inspector is though. Anyway, really cool little bayonet. I thoroughly enjoyed looking at it. I really want to get one for my own personal collection. But yeah, unfortunately they do sell for a lot of money because they're very collectible. I should also point out that the early wooden grips were often ribbed as well. This one here is just smooth. Anyway guys, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe because I've got plenty more content coming. And if I made any errors or you have any more information, please feel free to comment below so we can all have a scroll and learn a little bit more. Thanks for watching.